Welcome to part 2 of responding to the challenges of national resilience, and thank you very much for joining us today. Before we start, I'm just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping. This event and the Q&A is very much on the record. This will be followed by a green room, which will be off the record. If you do have any questions or comments during the webinar, please do use the chat function, and we'll go through as many of those as we possibly can during the session. This is part 2. In part 1, we looked at responding to the challenges of national resilience, again, the same topic, but we really looked at how COVID-19 had demonstrated that rapid transformation and innovation of defence information activities was possible, and discussed how it would inform wider technological innovation, accelerate multi-domain integration, and also drive information advantage. Whilst we're obviously in the midst of a second wave, there are some key issues and indeed lessons that have already emerged from COVID-19 by organisations which have successfully pivoted and fully utilised the potential of information to aid leaders. So in part 2 today, we'll discuss how Defence has successfully overcome the leadership and organisational challenges that COVID-19 has presented, enabled by the successful integration and indeed sharing of information. We'll explore how Defence's initial lessons from COVID-19 have the potential to enable greater support to cross-government activities in the future, and which lessons can be used by the private sector. To help us do that, I'm delighted that we have Major General David Eastman, MBE, who took over his current role of General Officer Commanding Regional Command in February 2020. This also includes in theory, secondary role of Deputy Commander of the Standing Joint Command UK, the headquarters, which is responsible for all military operations in the UK. By chance or potentially by misfortune, he overtook this appointment just before the arrival of COVID-19, and for 5 months during the summer, he stepped up as the full-time Commander of Standing Joint Command UK. His previous appointments have included planning the redeployment of British forces from Afghanistan, force development and strategic management of the UK military force structure in support of the 2015 Strategic Defence and Security Review, and a stint as military assistant at a strategic level for the Assistant Chief of the General Staff. And so we couldn't have had anyone better qualified to discuss with us Defence's leadership and indeed organisational challenge for COVID-19. And it gives me great pleasure to hand over to David. Please do come off mute, David. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Emma, and for your very kind introduction, and also for the opportunity to speak to the Nimbus 90 group today. So as you rightly said, I took over as General Officer Commanding Regional Command in February this year. Regional Command is responsible for the provision of enabling support for the Army so that the Army can live, train and operate. So we run all the garrisons and stations across the UK, Germany, Nepal and Brunei. And we're responsible for Army engagement with UK society. And a very much a secondary role has been this Deputy Standing Joint Commander role, which used to be for an hour on a Monday where we get a brief and that would be it. Having taken over the job for about 2 weeks, I was asked to hand the regional command back to my predecessor and to step up and focus solely on the Standing Joint Command element. And as you said, from May to September, I commanded the organisation and the defence response at the operational level. So what is SJC? What is the Standing Joint Command? It's an organisation that was set up to provide defence support to homeland resilience operations. And the Defence Strategic Direction in 2016 requires the MOD to provide support to UK civil authorities. And usually that's in 4 sort of thematic areas. There are fixed tasks like bomb disposal and counter-terrorism, and we do that on a daily basis. There are security tasks, support to the police for large events. And there are environmental tasks like response to fire and floods. And then industrial tasks like providing contingency for large strikes. We've done that with the firefighters and fuel tanker drivers. And some examples of what we've done in the past include the Saddleworth Moor fires, Toddbrook Dam and Whaley Bridge, the aftermath of the Novichok poisonings in Salisbury, and support to no-deal Brexit preparations, just to give you a feel for the sort of things that we've been doing. And in order to be able to do that, we need good relationships and timely and effective liaison with the other government departments and local leadership. The premise being that you need to make friends before you need them in this game. And this normally occurs through a network of 10 joint military commands. We've got around the country. We have one in each of the devolved administrations, and then we have 7 that are set up across England, and they're a permanent fixture. Normally, we would only step up one of these joint military commands at a time in response to some kind of situation. So in the Tobruk Dam, we set up headquarters Northwest. They worked straight to us in the SJC, and we would deal with the situation using local and then our strategic operational level. For the response to the pandemic, though, which we call OpRescript, and for the first time ever, we activated all 10 joint military commands at the same time. We also expanded this headquarters. The SJC part of this headquarters is normally only 23 people. Overnight, we expanded it to 280 people in terms of the headquarters staffing, and then we augmented all of the joint military commands with extra people. So significant investment in the command and control structure across the whole of the nation. When we started the operation in February, we didn't really understand what it was that would be required from us. What were we required to deliver? And we thought that the greatest contribution was probably going to be in the form of general duties mass support. So we stood up 20,000 regular and reserve soldiers from across all 3 services and a wide range of specialisms, and we called that the COVID Support Force. As the operation has developed, though, the actual requirement has become much more focused, and our support has been delivered in some very specific areas and actually is broadened out to the wider defence. So we've included defence equipment and support, the Defence Science and Technology laboratories, and all of the single services, and they've all been involved in this. And in all, including the SJC, we've seen well over 14,000 people deployed in support of the operation in some form or other over the last 9 months. And to give you more of a feel for what that support has actually been, surprisingly for us, and actually most importantly, has been planning support at the local, regional and national level. We had over 1,200 planners embedded in the local resilience organisations, in the NHS regional hubs, and in government departments like the Cabinet Office, DHSC, the NHS, MHCLG. We had people in the Scottish Government, the Welsh Government, and the Irish Civil Contingencies Group. And we effectively emptied the staff and students from our Defence Academy and pushed them out as planners and headquarters staff across the country. And these are planners who are trained to operate at pace and in conditions of uncertainty and with delivery in mind. And they've provided the framework for the organisational planning across the country using the military estimate and planning process across the piece. Secondly, we assisted in the development, construction and manning of the 11 Nightingale, Louisa Jordan, Dragon's Heart hospitals, using our engineer and medical planners to help work out how to deliver the Nightingales, as well as some excellent commercial expertise and networks of a little-known organisation called the Engineer and Logistics Staff Corps. And this is a unit which consists of well-connected CEOs, business leaders, and high-profile experts and businessmen who volunteer their own time, and they hold military reserve ranks and support the military in time of crisis. And the Nightingales provide an excellent example of the sort of potent effect of the combination of planning skills and the networking capability that the Engineering and Logistics Staff Corps were able to bring to the operation. I suspect it probably takes 15 years, 20 years to design and build a hospital. We had to do it in 10 days, and that takes an entirely different mindset and planning process. And so that's where our planners were able to add value, and also the network from the Engineering and Logistics Staff Corps who could call on and call in favours from all sorts of different organisations. On testing, we put one of our logistic brigade commanders and her headquarters into DHSC, and they provided planning and implementation support. We supported the static regional testing sites and testing for care homes with manpower. And we also developed the mobile testing unit capability, and that was developed in response to a requirement for us to reach more people and in more remote locations. And over a weekend, a combination of REME, RLC and Royal Engineers built the mobile testing unit capability, it actually proved to be a real success. Eventually, we deployed 236 of these across the country with 3,100 people from Defence committed to them. And we carried out nearly 1 million tests using that mobile testing unit capability. And that's now been handed over to contractors, which is how the military aid to the civil authority system works. We were also engaged in logistic improvements at the laboratories to enable greater testing capacity. And again, this is a real success story. At the National Biocentre Lab in Milton Keynes, one of our logistic warrant officers and his team was able to aid an expansion of throughput from 300 tests per day to 30,000 tests per day. And at one point, they reached 42,000 tests in one day, purely through logistic efficiencies that they were able to introduce into the laboratory in Milton Keynes. So real benefit from the logistic planning capability that we deployed there. And we're trialling testing in schools. We've got 100 combat medical technicians deployed to 3 schools in Salisbury, Lewisham and Poole. They're carrying out a trial now that ends today. And we aim to train the trainer and teach the teachers how to do those tests. And then, of course, we're supporting the current mass testing trial in Liverpool with 2,000 troops deployed in support of that task. And that's a trial to see how we can get off the whole country testing in the longer term. On PPE, so protection equipment, personal protection equipment, we provided planning support again at the departmental level, procurement support through DE&S, Defence Equipment and Support, and then lower level support at the warehouses and the distribution nodes. And again, another success story. We put one of our logistic brigade commanders and his headquarters in direct support of a change from a national demand-led system for PPE to a push system. And at the height of the crisis, that system was able to deliver 25 million PPE items a day around the country. And when you bear in mind that Amazon delivers 28 million items a day across Europe, it gives you an indication of the sort of scale that we were talking about in terms of the effect of that. So that was really successful. In other areas, we've provided drivers for ambulances and oxygen tankers. We've decontaminated ambulances for the Welsh Ambulance Service Trust. We've provided mortuary services, PPE fitting, casualty evacuation, and high dependency patient transfer in support of the NHS. But in line with the sort of MACA principles, we've gradually stepped away from a lot of those tasks now as we handed over to government organisations and contractors. And the force structure was reduced right down to about 400 at its sort of lowest level. We're now steadily building back up as we face the developing situation across the nation. We're at around 2,700 troops committed now. We're heading towards up to 5,000 and then more in due course to provide support. And the reason for that is we're facing the pandemic concurrent with flu pressures, winter flu pressures from the NHS, EU exit, and of course the usual environmental issues that we face during the winter months in terms of flooding and so on and so forth. So we need to be ready for that. So what have been the real challenges for us? I think probably 3 big challenges that I want to highlight. The first one is timelines. The planning timeline has been very aggressive. We did have a flu pandemic response contingency plan on the shelf as a starting point, but every day has been a real learning experience, and we've had to innovate throughout the entire process in the face of quite a limited understanding of how the virus works and what the response should look like. And the watchwords, as ever, have been flexibility and agility throughout this, because, of course, we are after all, an insurance policy. So we're often required to act in situations that are really time sensitive or require a mass response at notice that's far too short for contractors to deliver against. So it's always under time pressure, and that's been a real issue for us. The second issue has been relationships. We've had to develop very strong relationships very quickly. We've got some really well-established connections with the government departments that we usually support during fire and flood or homeland security type operations. We know who to talk to, and we've got those connections, and we train together. But we don't have very good relationships, or didn't have good relationships with MHCLG and the NHS. And of course, they were front and centre in this response. So we've had to work really hard to develop strong relationships at all levels in those departments. And the way that they function is very different to the way that we function in terms of their structures, processes, command and control. And it's taken us a very long time to work out how they operate and with whom we ought to be working at what level. That said, we are in a very much better place now than we were in February, March and April when we were dealing with the initial response. And we've got some very well developed connections, and we will maintain those connections now over time. That was definitely a lesson well learned in that sort of area. And the third area of concern has been profile. We've had to be really careful not to overexpose ourselves. When Defence responds to homeland resilience tasks, there is always forensic political and media attention. And we see that whenever we deploy anywhere in response to fire and floods. The lead responders from the other agencies are actually dealing with it. We are usually providing support, like filling sandbags or providing helicopters, but the media tends to focus on the uniform. And of course, that can cause friction, and it's not fair. The lead responders, and in this case, the NHS, DHSC, they have been the lead, and we've been at real pains to make it clear that we are in support of other government departments. We're not leading any of this. This is about providing support where we can and where it's required. And we've driven that into all of our troops when we've deployed them forward. Conscious of the time, I'll do the positives and then conclude. So what are the positives? We definitely have got a robust structure, and it really works. This has been the first nationwide resilience operation, as I said at the beginning. It's been a huge endeavour in comparison to our previous resilience operations. And to give you an idea of the scale, since the start of the response, we've completed 227 separate military aid to the civilian authority tasks throughout this operation. And we've still got 41 tasks ongoing now. It's really clear that the joint military commands, the 10 joint military commands with their strong local relationships and understanding, have been our most effective asset throughout all of this, and our liaison officers across the government departments. In military terms, we would call it our centre of gravity. And it plays to that point about making friends before you need them. The relationship's been absolutely essential. The second point is our planning process. The mission analysis and estimate process, which we teach all of our leaders, has proven to be really robust and effective at dealing with what has been a really wide and eclectic range of problems that have been thrown at us over the last 9 months. And our junior officers and soldiers have proven to be really exceptional planners. They've turned their hand to some unfamiliar environments, some unfamiliar situations. They've engaged really well with their civilian counterparts in a sort of empathetic and supportive way, and developed those strong relationships. And really key has been their ability to plan quickly with minimal information, to develop an 80% workable solution and then turn it into action on the ground very quickly. And that's not something that government departments would normally be required to do, but it's something we do all the time and we train for all the time. And it's worked really well in this particular situation. Thirdly, understanding and anticipation. We've had this really well-connected neural network that's operated from the strategic level down to the tactical level at all levels across the government. We've had it left to right across the country in all of the devolved administrations. And we've had a central, what we've called the Information Manoeuvre Group, which was our intelligence analysis capability. And that has enabled extraordinary analysis and understanding of what is going on across the country. We've had a really good picture of what is happening. We've been able to pull all of the different data sets in and then try and predict where the stresses are going to appear next and preempt some of those stresses and have people ready to go and support where we think those stresses might appear. So that's been a real winner. And then finally, in terms of the positives, has been innovation. From an innovation perspective, we proposed, designed and built the mobile testing unit concept and capability. One of our reservists was at the forefront of designing and developing a new online platform with eBay, actually, which allowed community, primary and social care providers to order PPE direct from the central NHS stockpile, which helped to save lives. Our chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear team repurposed respirator testing technology to enable support to PPE fitting in hospitals. And our specialist reserves, and in particular the engineer and logistics staff corps, contributed to the planning and building of the Nightingales. And we currently have some of our REME engineering officers and soldiers helping to design a mobile laboratory in the same fashion as the mobile testing unit was produced. So those were the sort of key positives from my perspective. To conclude, the crisis, as for everyone, has thrown a really unique set of circumstances at us, and Defence has responded accordingly. But we have had to spend the entire time constantly looking at what we're doing, looking at the situation and learning useful lessons along the way and implementing those lessons concurrently. We've used our ability to generate mass, respond quickly and plan in adversity and uncertainty to deliver some quick and decisive effects to provide support to the various departmental leads. But they have been in the lead and we've provided that support in terms of response options and problem areas. And then we've tailored our support as we better understood the problem over time. What's been really clear throughout for me, though, is that our sailors, soldiers and airmen, regulars of reserves, civil servants, officers and other ranks have all performed outstandingly, whether they've been on the front line in a mobile testing unit or at the strategic level supporting the development of the Joint Biosecurity Centre or NHS capacity development or the strategic testing capability. So we're now standing by. We're waiting to see how the situation will develop over time, and we are preparing to provide further support as required. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was fantastic and an amazing achievement, both in what you've led and also all the people, as you say, huge number of people that have been involved. I've certainly written down a lot of stats and facts, which we're going to come on to when we go into the Q&A. As I said before, please do, if you've got some questions or comments, please do put them into the chat at the bottom of the Zoom details that you've got there, because this is very much for you to ask those questions to push your projects, businesses forward in these uncharted times. So thank you very much, David. And now I'm going to hand over to Ben Legg, just to give a little bit of information about Ben, who's kind of going to be talking about pivoting in response to strategic shock and a private sector's perspective. Ben actually started his career as a captain in the Royal Engineers and spent 3 years then as a strategic consultant or strategy consultant at McKinsey before moving into senior leadership roles at Coca-Cola. He then became the COO of Google Europe and undertook a variety of global C-suite technology roles in other companies, including launching Ola in the UK. Ben is now in his 4th career reinvention after a global career living in 9 countries and working in 60. He is the CEO of Digital People International. He mentors startups and provides thought leadership and investor support. He's also the CEO and co-founder of the Portfolio Collective, the world's leading community helping entrepreneurial professionals launch and grow their portfolio careers, and also sits on Nimbus 90's advisory board. By pure coincidence, he also went to school with David. So Ben, over to you. Please do come off mute.
Mute. Okay, great to be here. And great to catch up with Dave after a long time not seeing each other. Funny the way we reconnect these days. Okay, so what's going on in the world of business? The simple summary of what's gone on this year is the future has been brought forward by, depending on the industry, between 5 and 15 years. So there's been lots of people forecasting, you know, what will happen. Cash will die one day, bank branches will die, you know, digital payments will be everywhere. None of us thought it would kind of all happen in one go. remote working was going to be a thing. No one knew quite how fast it would happen. E-commerce, we knew was growing. None of us really realized that our grandparents would actually be able to buy groceries online, but turns out they can. So just everything's been happening, and you name an industry, you can say what was the forecast for the future, and chances are it's just been brought forward. There's obviously been a few spanners thrown in the works that weren't quite what was forecast as well. And so what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about just some examples of companies that have pivoted, and a little bit about some of the broader themes that I'm seeing, which are also kind of interesting, that cut across different companies. So if I start with, actually, but one final thing to say is, if you're in business and you are of an entrepreneurial mindset, it's probably the biggest opportunity in our lifetimes. The whole world is being reinvented, therefore there's opportunity everywhere. So yes, probably on average, there's a lot of doom and gloom, but that's all about mindset. It really is a phenomenal opportunity just to really play an active part in reinventing the world, rather than just sitting back and getting punched in the face. So just a few examples, and some of my examples will be startup related, because a lot of my life and my career these days are helping startups build great companies. And in no particular order, one of the companies that I work quite closely with is called Mrs. Wordsmith. Anyone that has kids aged between 4 and 11 may know them. They make all sorts of things for teaching your kids to read English. I joined earlier in the year, and basically they were a print company with all sorts of cool print products and some apps under development. And supposedly I was there to help them build some great apps. And then lockdown came along. Couldn't quite accelerate the apps fast enough, but they said, okay, every kid's learning from home. What do we do? Introduced a whole array, 30 or 40 different downloadable workbooks, so that kids and teachers could basically download ways to learn English in a fun, entertaining way from home. Basically, an entire product roadmap, product range launched in 2 weeks, based on the assets that had been used for print or apps, but in essence came out early. Another example is a company I've worked with. It's a laundry company. Now, they had thought their big business would be all focused on providing laundry services to Airbnb landlords. So, you clean the sheets, you clean the towels, and they had created this amazing process that used all sorts of clever chemicals that don't destroy the environment to basically, clean all this stuff and do it efficiently as well. Clearly, with lockdown, Airbnb kind of dried up for quite some time. Tourism is close to dead, albeit, tourism within the same country is not as dead as international tourism. They actually pitched the NHS and said, hey, we've actually, we can clean all of your scrubs and everything else going on in the hospitals. Won a massive contract in something like a month. The NHS historically has had about a 2 to 3 year potentially procurement cycle, and they've kind of accelerated everything there. Another example is a company I work with is a veterinary training company. So they were focused on professional development for vets, but they did most of it over webinars. And with lockdown, they basically went out to all the organizers of conferences focused on veterinary and nursing and other kind of medical related conferences, and said, how are you going to organize your conference? And they all said, I don't know, we'll probably just cancel it. And they said, how about we run a virtual version of your conference? Their revenues quadrupled this year on the back of basically that pivot. Turns out conferences is a way bigger industry than teaching vets how to cut open dogs or whatever they do. So another just one local to me, I don't work with them, but I've kind of seen them close hand, very cool, is I live in London, and there's a company called Natora, who are primarily, or were pre-lockdown, primarily focused on delivering vegetables and other ingredients to fancy restaurants. Obviously restaurants shut. So what did they do? They basically rebuilt their website and said, we're now going to supply vegetables to people's homes. Their direct to the home business is now bigger than their restaurant business ever was. And obviously one day restaurants should reopen, and they've just doubled or tripled in size. So all sorts of companies basically saying, okay, the world's changed, I will change with it. And the ones that are doing it faster are thriving. And one thing I want to highlight, and Dave talked about it a bit, is the NHS. I think, hats off to the NHS when it comes to things like innovation. And I actually work with a lot of healthcare startups. I don't work with the NHS, but they work with the NHS. But some of the things I've observed is, if you think about it, pre-lockdown, if you had a problem, you had to go and see a GP face to face. Now you don't. And quite frankly, that was clear for a long time that it was generally a waste of time. But through a mixture of video conferences, self-assessment, home testing kits, or going straight to the experts and bypassing the GP, in the majority of cases now, you don't need to go and see a GP face to face. Well, that's made the process more efficient and also helped people avoid waiting rooms filled with people with germs or with a virus. Obviously, procurement I talked about, their procurement system's gone from years down to months or less. They also, a company I work with is very cool, it's called Chiron Medical. It's, they have developed the artificial intelligence to screen cancer scans and use artificial intelligence to say, is there a tumor? Yes or no? Are they safe? Do we need further investigation? It's a process that historically was done by 2 radiographers separately, and then experts called in as required. And they basically did a test with the NHS during lockdown, because the NHS has backlogs with all of the non-urgent stuff because of COVID-19. They've just won a massive contract to roll out to 1/3 of the UK, in essence, bringing in artificial intelligence to screen cancer scans. So beyond coping with COVID-19, the NHS is already saying, how do we innovate in other ways? And obviously these things should stick. And the reality is there aren't enough radiographers going through university anyway, mainly because they know their jobs will be replaced by artificial intelligence one day. So these are the kind of things, it's cool innovation that will stick. So all sorts of examples of cool innovation. And there's a few broad themes across all the organizations I work with. One of them obviously is with face-to-face contact down, business travel, meetings, conferences all down. What are companies doing? There's obviously way more virtual communication these days. So companies have got way better at things like content marketing to raise awareness. The amount of writing articles, making videos, doing reports, etc., is going like crazy. Everyone's become a genius at Zoom, way beyond a one-to-one chat into like breakout groups. And something I discovered the other day, you can actually hand over your mouse to the person on the other side of the screen so you can teach each other stuff. You can annotate slides, all sorts of random stuff, but very cool. Not just Zoom, but there are other platforms. But we've all had to get way better at that. And linked to that, but something that I've zoomed in on a lot during lockdown is the way work is changing. So as Emma said, I did during lockdown form an organization called the Portfolio Collective, focused on helping people reinvent their careers, where instead of having one full-time job, you basically have a portfolio of paid activities. And it can be work, it can be projects, it can be board jobs, it can be writing a book, it can be doing virtual training, but there's all sorts of ways to make money. And why am I doing that? Because I'm basically just surfing on the bigger waves out there. Number one is most companies with this massive shock that happened are desperately trying to shrink their core headcount. Why? Because A, it reduces their fixed costs, and B, it increases flexibility. It's like, okay, I'll have the headcount I need to do the bare minimum, and anything else I'll try and flex up and flex down with temporary work. Other big themes though is that with all that shrinking down means there's an enormous boom going on in part-time work, temporary work, interim work, expert advice, etc. So it's kind of like one is shrinking and one is growing. And that's also then being driven in parallel by the whole working from home situation, where if you're now working from home, you don't need to work for a company in your town. You can work for a company anywhere in the world. And what companies are doing is saying, okay, I need an expert in artificial intelligence, or I need someone to make me a logo for my brand. I need someone who can build me a dashboard for my analytics. And you don't care where that person's based. With the slight exception of time zone, sometimes it's handy to have someone in your time zone, but even that can mean Europe, not your local town in the UK. So what this is meaning is that despite the best efforts of Brexiteers and Donald Trump and others, the world's just got way more global as a result of lockdown and working from home. Because let's face it, you don't need a passport and you don't need a visa to work for a company on the other side of the world. The organization I formed during lockdown has a team, most of whom I've never met in person, in the UK, the US, Spain, India, the Netherlands, and Germany. And we just operate as a virtual team. We do have a center of gravity in London, and hopefully one day I'll get to meet some of them. But in essence, it's a virtual team from day one, and that is the future of work. You do not need to always be in the same place at the same time, unless there's some kind of on the ground work that needs to be done. So that's a massive trend going on, which obviously is an opportunity and a threat. If you have some hustle and some skills, or can define some great skills, you can work for anyone, anywhere in the world. We've got people in India earning London or New York rates of pay. That's pretty cool for them. It also means if you've got an average set of skills and have no hustle, you're probably going to earn Indian rates of pay as opposed to UK rates of pay. So it really is going to shake up the world of work for absolutely everyone. So really exciting. As I say, the overall theme though is whatever we thought would happen by 2030 is happening now. And there's a massive shakeup. Every organization I've worked with during lockdown has either tripled or because of amazing opportunity, or had to pivot to survive. But ultimately, I don't know of a single organization that's had a steady as you go lockdown.
Thank you, Ben, very much indeed. Really, really good to see that aspect of it as well. And thank you very much indeed for your ongoing support of Nimbus. So we're going to go into Q&A. We've already had some questions in the chat function, so please do keep adding those. Thank you. All of you have already put some in. I'm going to come now to both David and Ben for this. And we've already got a number of questions, just starting with one that we've got from Andrew Mills. He says, in times of crisis, we often bypass and avoid certain administrative processes for expedience. In hindsight, which areas, if any, of the planning and approvals process were found to add no benefit and might indeed be written out of future routine project management of critical paths? So over to you, if you don't mind, David.
Yeah, okay. Difficult for me to sort of answer that one from a sort of project management perspective, because I've not been managing projects. But what I can say is that we have smoothed some of the bureaucracy that we had in place between organisations. So between the MOD and us, between us and our deployed headquarters. And actually, one of the key fundamental points behind that was delegation down to the lowest level. And so actually it's the Secretary of State who did this, pushed down authority and responsibility for what we could deploy and when, and the decision making for that to the lowest possible levels, whilst minimizing the amount of risk that comes with that. And what that meant was we were very, very quick to be able to respond to requests that came in. We did find that some of our other processes didn't match that level of speed, but actually in terms of a principle, it just reinforced that whole point that the lower level that you can get decisions made, the more likely they are to be the right decision, because you've got people who actually know what they're talking about making the decisions. And I sit at a level where you get to see the surface of things, but you don't really understand what the depth of the issues are. And so for me, that was probably one of the principal areas that we really streamlined process, and that's the decision making as low as possible, but not giving too much risk to some of those people that were having to take those decisions, I think. Is that enough of an answer, do you think?
Thank you very much indeed. Ben, can I get a view from what you've seen from an industry standpoint, either during the pandemic or indeed outside the pandemic, from your perspective?
Yeah, so, and I actually should comment a little bit, it's kind of related to some of the stuff Dave's talking about, but I work with a lot of companies that sell to schools and sell to hospitals, and schools and hospitals are very often government controlled or whatever, and have both been massively changed by the crisis this year. If I start with schools, what we've seen is the more freedom the schools get, the faster they innovated. So it echoes Dave's point, which is like private schools could say, right, okay, we're working from home, let's all get Zoom, let's buy these materials, let's just do it. State schools had to ask for permission, that takes longer. So I think that whole just push decision-making authority, and probably a hint of budget too, quite frankly, because often it's budget that's the problem. But in a crisis, when you think about the cost of lives and the economy being destroyed, a bit of budget for schools to get Zoom or for schools to buy some extra materials is nothing in the big scheme of things. So definitely drive decision making down with a hint of budget, and then learn lessons and polish and fine tune things later. Same with hospitals. We've seen that a lot of hospitals have had to innovate because they said, right, we're now focused on COVID-19, but there's a bunch of other unhealthy people or issues to deal with elsewhere. How do we do that? And the ones that have had the most autonomy have been the ones that have adapted the fastest. So certainly in this crisis, and probably most crises, pushing decision-making down is definitely the way to go.
Thank you, Ben, very much indeed. Just moving on, Joe said, could you please elaborate slightly more on the vignette of the reservist that designed a platform with eBay? Is this a blueprint for the future employment of reservists, i.e. the interface with the private sector? It'd be great to hear both your thoughts. David, over to you.
Yeah, so this guy actually worked with eBay anyway, and he was deployed. He was a captain who was deployed with the headquarters that went into the NHS and worked with them on their PPE distribution and produced this amazing app. And actually, we've seen similar stories writ large across the whole of the organisation when it comes to the reservist specialism and expertise. The reserves bring to us the ability to increase mass. They bring local knowledge, and actually what it's meant is deploying local units in their local areas. You get a much better relationship with the locals because they're from that area and they've already got these relationships anyway. And they also bring specialist skills that we just don't have in the military and in defence, or we have insufficient amount of it to be able to use. And I think actually more and more the utility of the reservist is coming to the fore, and we think about the reserves all the time now when we respond to various requests for support, because they just bring that level of expertise. And actually tie that with the engineering logistics staff corps that are operating at that senior level and have the networks as well. And you've got a really powerful mechanism there that you can call on, to respond in different ways. So for me, this is not new. We've always used reservist specialist skills. I remember deploying to Bosnia and Kosovo with reservists that came with us that did some amazing things that we just couldn't do ourselves. So it's not new. We're just using them in a more effective way now and more often. And actually that's right and proper, because we are trying to use the totality of the whole force structure that we've got, not just use the regulars, because they bring a completely different perspective to things, but they also bring new skill sets. And why wouldn't we want to use that? So for me, this is a real positive from the reservist perspective.
Thank you, Dave, very much. Ben, any thoughts on that, having obviously previously?
It's fascinating. I don't spend much of my day thinking about the future reservists. I guess I was one for 9 years after I left. Never got called up. But I actually love the idea. And I think you can take it in a whole load of ways, and you shouldn't narrow it to just think about reservists, but think about what's the job that needs to get done and where's the talent and how do you do it. So, beyond reservists, and don't just think within the UK or just think about Brits. I mean, quite frankly, you could have people all over the world monitoring for terrorists. You don't need Brits, and they don't have to be in the UK. But there's a whole load of things that you can do. And something that was interesting, this comes back, I think Dave said something like you need to make your friends before the crisis happens. And it's something the NHS, we all know, has been historically very stodgy and may go back that way one day, but it's had a pretty good year this year. But they've been investing, for example, in startups for years. And actually, I've been mentoring some of them who've won grants from the NHS on, I think it's called Innovate UK. I can't remember. They've got a fund and they actually sponsor stuff. But could the army actually have, sponsor accelerators, invest in startups, work in all sorts of much more entrepreneurial ways, a bit like you have corporate VCs, venture capitalists who, basically place bets and nurture, entrepreneurs and other things for potential future opportunities. How much more could the armed forces do of that? So I think it could be a really interesting stream of defense for the future. And at the end of the day, not everyone needs to close and kill the enemy or wear sort of camouflage on the ground. There's so much other work in defense that really could be done by a mix of part-timers, startups, specialists, etc.
Thank you, Ben, very much indeed. So there's a question that has come in, really sort of almost looking at unlocking. So how do you unlock standard purchasing and collaboration arrangements to enable rapid partnering with commercial partners? David, I'm going to come to you first, but I think Ben, you might have views as well.
Yeah, very good question. We were fortunate that Defence Equipment and Support provided a lot of support to us from a whole of defence perspective. And of course, we've got a lot of commercial expertise and commercial arrangements in place already within Defence Equipment and Support, and we had a lot of forward-leaning partners from other, from commercial companies, because everybody wanted to support and help the overarching. This is a national problem. We were also, of course, we had people working 24 hours a day on some of these issues as well. So getting through some of the bureaucracy that normally takes quite a long time, we were able to turn things around very quickly. And then, of course, when there's a real problem, you bring the ministers in, and then you start to get ministerial direction to get things, sorted. Everybody was operating and is still operating at a really fast pace, turning things around much more quickly than would normally happen. Of course, the danger with that is that you still got to have the rigor associated with it. You are introducing risk. But I think because it boils back down to whenever we develop a campaign plan, if everybody can see what we're trying to achieve and you're all aiming for the same end result, then people will find inordinate ways to achieve that result. And that's a fundamental of our planning process. Make sure everybody understands what it is you are trying to achieve, and you will get some amazing innovation in terms of getting to that end point and overcoming hurdles and obstacles all the way through. I can't talk you through technical purchasing collaboration arrangements because that's not my sort of bailiwick. But in terms of a principle, that principle, I think, was applied across the board, and everybody really lent into it.
And Ben, there's a question there as well on sort of how do startups get involved too?
And it would depend on the problem to be solved, but there's got to be all sorts of ways to get involved. So I think you'd almost need to sort of start with what's the problem? Is it okay going forward? We need to build hospitals in 10 days anywhere in the world, whatever. Okay, which startups will help with that? And you could have grants, you could have competitions, you could have an accelerator. There's a whole load of ways to get startups involved. Or you almost go through Dave's list of top 10 worries or risks and say, how could you get startups involved? Maybe have theme-based, again, it could be grants, accelerators, etc. I think, again, this is a non-government person's view, but it's kind of scary that for whatever decades, a virus was top of the list of government worries, and yet no one did much about it. It's like, let's get that list, let's break it down into its component parts, and let's say, okay, government doesn't have to do everything. Government needs to coordinate and sponsor and challenge and whatever. And what's all the work and what's the right way to get it done? And I would have thought for the vast majority of that list of problems, there's probably a solution in there for that combination of venture capital, grants, accelerators, collaboration with startups.
Thank you, Ben, very much. And this is obviously very topical. The next one that's come up, this is from Glenn, who said, will the military be involved in vaccine rollout? And if so, what capacity? And that's over to David, if you can share any more.
Yeah, so we've already got military planners supporting the vaccine task force. We're sort of helping them out with their planning capability. Depending on how that rolls out, we might be asked to provide some support in a sort of deployment of the vaccine process or some kind of supporting role for that. We don't know yet. It really depends on what the plan is for deployment. It might be that they can use the NHS and that will work. I don't know. So we'll wait and see. But as it stands at the moment, we are providing planning support to work out how best to distribute. And it is a logistic problem if looking at the current vaccine, given the storage requirements. So it is quite a difficult logistic problem to resolve. We will help with that, and we might provide some mass support in the short term. I think is probably the only thing I can say about that, really.
Thank you, David, very much. There's also a question.
Emma, can I jump in on that one? Just a thought, and again, I haven't sort of decided what the vaccine, what's in it, how much it costs, or how it needs to be stored. But if I was, in charge of that, I don't know if it's Matt Hancock or someone like that, but I would be seriously tempted to say, right, I'm going to test the Army, the NHS, Amazon, Boots, Ocado, whatever, and actually give them all a chance to get it to market. I would also say that through the private providers, charge twice what it costs and use the profits from that to fund the NHS, and you could probably get the whole thing rolled out for free and faster.
Great ideas. Thank you very much indeed. We know someone who knows someone, so let's see. Let's throw that out there. That would be brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So I've got something from Andrew here that says, we train regularly with potential allied and partners. And when the dust settles on COVID, will we look to conduct joint training with OGDs, such as the NHS, to horizon scan and be prepared for the next global shock?
So we train with other government departments all the time. And the 10 joint military commands that are out across the country, my organisation, Regional Command, every year goes out and trains all of those organisations, and we do it together with all of the first responders across all of the local regions, and that's why we knew everybody in the local resilience forum and the strategic coordination groups out in the country. Usually, it's about responding to a fire or a flood or that kind of response. As I said in my sort of my quick spiel at the beginning there, what we haven't been doing is doing that with the NHS and the MHCLG at the sort of higher levels, and that is something that I suspect I'll be very surprised if we don't maintain that relationship and look to train in future and maintain some of those linkages with the other government departments. Whether we can do it across all the country and with all the trusts is a different matter. But we certainly do it with all of the government departments at a local and regional level.
Thank you, David, very much. I've got a question here as well, if we could cover it, from Chris. He says, on the subject of reservists, how much is the military looking at non-reservist veterans to fulfil roles in a crisis or national emergency, e.g. organisations such as OpReact, or through a more formal network that is more casual and flexible for than reservists?
So this is a really good question, and I'm remiss because I should have mentioned OpReact, because they have been superb in fulfilling a large number of roles across the country that either we just didn't have the capacity to do that because we were doing other things, or they were the sort of roles that you don't really want uniform military doing. So actually, OpReact have been superb, and they pulled together hundreds and hundreds of volunteers. I think we had 1,700 or something like that deployed at one point around the country, doing all sorts of roles. They had a central spine here with us, so that we could coordinate together and work together. And then we used them to do some, as I said, some of those roles that you just, there are some roles you just don't want military uniforms doing, or we would be better employed elsewhere. So really, really good question. And we were doing that, and they did superbly, really, really good job.
Thank you, David. And we're going to be short on time now, but final comment was, is the military too small to deliver civil capability? We've got some numbers in the chat there in terms of looking at Liverpool, looking at the size of the population, and indeed looking at if we had 2,000 soldiers. So David, if you don't mind, back with you.
Yeah, of course. And this goes back to the principles of military aid to the civil authority. We're not there to do this. We're there to provide a short-term stopgap response to these problems, where other government organisations or contractors either need time or aren't able to deliver at scale that kind of capability. So it's not our job to be able to cover the entire country and deliver all of that civil response. What it is our job to do is to assist in the short term in developing how you might take that forward, and then handing over to some contractor or some other government organisation who can then take it from us. So that the numbers actually don't, what you wouldn't do, for instance, with the Liverpool thing, is then extrapolate that to cover the whole country, because that's not what we're there to do. We've got defence outputs to deliver, as well as supporting the concurrency, concurrently the Homeland Resilience task. So I think that's how I'd answer that question.
Thank you, David, very much. So we're going to just round up, and it'd be great just to get just a lasting thought for everyone to take away, both from David and from Ben. So just to come back to you, just sort of a last thought for people who sadly are not joining the green room, just if you wouldn't mind.
So I think for me, this has been a real lesson in, firstly, how to work together for us with all of the other government departments, and make friends before you need them has been writ large across the whole of this deployment for me. And I think that the fact that everybody has lent in and worked to work hard together has been really good. The other thing for me is the flexibility and the positivity of our servicemen and women. I never cease to be amazed by what they will do and how positive they will be when they do it, and the professionalism that they do it with as well. And the number of emails and letters that we had from people who went to mobile testing units saying how wonderful and what a great sense of humour the servicemen and women have had. I can't tell you. So it's absolutely humbling to see. So for me, it's a really proud sort of point to make, and I think we should never forget that. Some of our young people are astounding.
Thank you very much, Ben. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm probably just two. One is most of what's going on in the world right now. Take out the virus itself, but the changes to industry, society, business, work, etc., were forecast, and not enough people took them seriously. So going forward, let's all learn that lesson and actually take them a bit more seriously. Not just viruses, but it's almost like whatever is forecast for 10 years out, let's try and get there faster rather than bury our heads in the sand. And the other one, coming back to new ways of working, and we talked a lot about through it, is that the army doesn't have to do everything. It needs to make sure that everything gets done, and therefore there's a whole load of new and collaborative ways to get things done, and get things done with startups, but with Amazon, with the NHS, with and trying to play around with those permutations, combinations, I think will make everyone more productive.
Thank you. Thank you both very much indeed. I think we've covered a lot of different topics with a lot of different thoughts in there. To have written down some of those stats and facts, incredible what's been achieved, David, by you and your teams. And indeed, some of the stats you're covering there, Ben, critical. If we don't learn from what's just happened, then we're all incredibly naive, and we've got so much opportunity that can come out of this, as well as being sensitive to both individuals and indeed to those being affected by the pandemic. So a huge thank you to you both.